In the November issue of our newsletter, Contact, I announced that I will lead a series of sessions on world religion. I hope people are interested. These will start in December and run twice a month into February. We will organize this by following a text written by Stephen Prothero entitled "God is Not One: The 8 Rival Religions That Run the World." I encourage you to participate. Not only do I think exposure to other faith traditions is expansive, but these topics should produce interesting, rich, and lively discussions. For the past few weeks, I have been reading or rereading this Prothero book, which is excellent, as well as reading Houston Smith on the same topics. After a bit too much of this, I found that I was sort of baked, overwhelmed, and my brain was turning to mush. So who knows what you'll get today? Too many religions, too many things going on. So many religions, and they change and adapt over the years, and they're accepted in practice in many different ways by their own adherents. Religions don't stay fixed and hold still. At their simplest, they are belief systems that our fellow humans developed to understand the world around us and to guide them through their lifetimes. All religion is deeply infused with culture, geography, and history, and other religions tend to seem odd when examined with a mind and an eye that was raised with Western sensibilities and beliefs. To think about how religions change and grow, let's take Christianity, the religious tradition that is our heritage and the tradition most of us know best. It, of course, began with the life of Jesus and his attempts to reform Judaism by bringing faith to all believers with revolutionary messages of love and caring. But in the years after his execution, his followers just sort of wandered the Middle East and the Mediterranean, spreading a message that was only loosely defined, but that gradually evolved and sort of coalesced into a path towards salvation for believers who thought they were facing the end of time imminently. The congregations they formed were small and frequently persecuted, but this movement took hold and started to fill a moral space that Roman polytheism had left vacant. Writings gradually appeared to tell the Christian stories in an attempt to codify doctrine and practice. About 2 centuries later, after the crucifixion, Emperor Constantine of Rome sanctioned Christianity as the Roman faith. Some of the writings were declared to be Holy Scripture and codified, sealed as the Bible. The rest thrown away. The nature of the Trinity was agreed on. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, equal parts God. And one Catholic Church was created as a religious authority. Now the church, this is going to lead me to a little excursion here. I can't find the passage, so I won't read it. But somewhere last week, I saw a wonderful story about a seeker who was climbing the highest mountain anywhere to reach God and to learn the truth. What he didn't know was he was being tailed by an agent of the devil who was keeping an eye on him. Well, the man succeeded. He reached the top. He found God, and he was given the truth, just handed right over, the same way God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Satan's spy went running down the mountain to tell his master what had transpired. But when Satan heard the report, he said, "Don't worry. Humanity now has the truth, but they will just go and institutionalize it." Well, Christians sure did that before Jesus. To speed things up, there was a split in the 11th century, mostly a power fight with some theology, and the Eastern Orthodox Church separated from Rome and the papacy. 500 years later, Martin Luther catalyzed the Protestant Reformation in Europe, and many new denominations grew away from Catholicism. Each brought their own particular take on Christian theology, and each had their own practices. New groups continued to form. Unitarian Universalists are fairly recent on this timeline, and they keep forming and growing. Right now, the most rapidly growing Christian group is the Church of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. In numbers, Christianity is now huge. It's the largest major religion in the world today, however you count things, with well over 2 billion adherents, some of whom actually adhere. Because we're familiar with Christianity, we're well aware that there's incredible diversity within and even within any single subgroup of Christians. One example here, the Nicene Creed very clearly states the Catholic profession of faith. But you know from engaging any of our Catholic neighbors that you have to ask each one what they really believe, how they really practice, what they think Catholicism is to them. Some are steady in their belief and quite orthodox in practice, while others waver and hold many doubts, and sometimes show up just to get the cookie to hedge their bets. Comparative religion is difficult, in part because there is no precise definition of what constitutes a religion. The word itself implies behavior, at least in our language traditions. It comes from religare, the Latin word for ties that bind. Most religions involve creed, some statement of beliefs and values, ritual activities and practices, standards for ethical conduct, and often institutions that contain and organize their shared activity. But none of these characteristics are deal breakers. You use, for example, have no creed, although we do have some shared values. The major Asian traditions have no central institutions or power structure, although their communities often support an array of temples, monasteries, schools, and religious teachers. I could go on and on about religious characteristics that some religions don't have. But as with everything I talk about this morning, I'm going to just be sampling and talking little pieces. There's no way I can talk about this whole topic. As I say, there's books and books and books. As much as this may offend the Orthodox practitioners and fundamentalists from most traditions, religions adapt with the times and tend to be vital, dynamic, and alive, as understood and practiced by adherents of the faith. Most major religions began with a fairly limited and rigid set of notions, often based and grounded in formative text. Sometimes the religious movements pass through phases of growth and adjustment, and sometimes this adjustment just happens on the fly as adherents work to make sense of their faith in the lives they know and live on a daily basis. This last process is apparent today as people learn to treat teachings drawn from the Quran, the Bible, or the Upanishads figuratively whenever needed. Sometimes this is to accommodate new learning, such as scientific discovery. Other times it's to adjust for changes in customs and values. We expect to see this kind of revisionism as ideas like feminism, class equality, and racial justice become important in our lives. The old stories tend to be offensive and patriarchal in regards to much current thought. And so many people learn to treat them as metaphor, or just decide that certain parts of their religious teachings are obsolete. But to consider how growth and adaptation of an entire religion tradition happens, I will look to a few examples, and primarily the example of Hinduism. Early Hindu practice developed in the Indus Valley, the area that now is in India, Pakistan, and was pretty much directed at finding order in the world. To do this, the hopeful Hindu tried to placate and please some or all of a large pantheon of gods. Priests acted as intermediaries and paid homage to the gods through fire sacrifice, feeding the gods with animals and plants cooked at the temple. In this way, it was much like early Judaism, except that was to one God. Hindus hope for all that has sustained their lives: good harvests, cows, sons, and victory in battle. Hindu understanding drew from the Vedas, a set of Sanskrit texts. There were separate gods associated with all aspects of life, each of the forces of nature, health and fortune, and anything you can think of. And there is some overlap, but these early Hindu gods are not yet the Hindu gods we're most likely to know today. They were invented over time. Vedic practice was pretty much all action and ritual. Hinduism becomes more familiar to us with the writing of the Upanishads. These were a philosophical and spiritual text developed and written by sages. While early Hinduism was pragmatic, although world-affirming, this newer Hinduism became preoccupied with the nature and destiny of the human soul. The nature and destiny of the human soul, and was anchored in wisdom traditions. It was based on the work of thinkers. Before I continue, let me briefly describe the Hindu concept of humanity and the soul. For the most part, Hindus claim that each of us is born where we are meant to be in our present stage of existence, and that what happens to us is what should happen to us during this life. This is based on the notion of karma, our moral actions and their consequences. We each possess an eternal and unchanging soul, the Atman. Upon death of our present body, this Atman transmigrates to a new life form, guided by the deeds of our current life. It's unclear how this happens. The heavens are involved in some way, but no specific god or actor is named. It's just the way of life and of the cosmos. We come back as something, but we have no knowledge of that something, and that something has no knowledge of us. The process of reincarnation continues eternally and is known as samsara. Because eternal souls are trapped in our bodies and forced to live with our illusions, this process entails suffering. And because there's a conflict between us and our souls. And the only path to breaking the cycle is to attain moksha, a state of spiritual liberation that frees the soul from our body. The idea is similar to the Buddhist notion of enlightenment. Moksha is reached through wisdom and devotional practice of yoga. And yogas, there are many yogas. Yoga basically means discipline. To attain moksha, one must realize that the Atman, our soul, is the same as Brahman, the divine. However, we can't just learn this and know it and say it. We must experience it. And coming to see this true experience of self and divine being the same thing, requires much study, practice, and discipline. In this system, Hindus were encouraged to accept their current status and life condition and to do everything possible to live well and create good karma. Accepting our role is an important part of this. It speaks to humility. Hinduism is the basis of India's caste system, and the importance of preserving this order was essential. The caste you belong to remains fixed for life. You can't be upwardly mobile. If you wish your soul to do better, your role is to promote a positive reincarnation. No Hindu believes that a lower caste person has the resources to obtain moksha and break the eternal cycle. And this is the ultimate goal, the final release from samsara. It's easy to see that Hinduism played a strong functional role in preserving order and maintaining the system of caste for centuries. It told people that they were where they should be, and that was the order of things. Needless to say, if the end goal is moksha, and the best you can do to approach it is to arrange a favorable rebirth, which your soul, but not you, will experience, some people grew impatient with this concept. They might have said, I want a chance to get there in this life. I want it. And gradually the Hindu narratives began to shift. And this was probably, I don't know, around the year 1000 on our calendar. The same understanding of the Atman, samsara, and moksha persisted, but they gradually developed a dimension of devotional behavior that could influence the aspects of this lifetime as well. Hindus could choose to commit to one or more of the gods from a pantheon of many and entreat them to influence their this world concerns. Things like protecting crops or arranging marriages or delaying death, whatever. In theory, one can even obtain moksha through the mercy and grace of your chosen God if they choose to intervene in such a way. So for the past 15 years or so, many Hindus have been aligning themselves with Vishnu or Shiva or Krishna or the female god Shakti or the well-loved Ganesh. This attachment is an action of personal faith and devotion. They visit the images of their particular god frequently at the temples, and they engage with this image. Compared to the Vedic form in which Hinduism started, this seems very modern, individual, and even consumer-oriented. I've spent a while talking about Hinduism, partly as example, and partly because it's a tradition that I don't think many of us know all that well. But all religions change over time, if nothing else, to adapt to and accommodate the realities of new times and cultures. There is an immense relativism and flexibility in how individuals interpret creeds and teachings, those that often survived thousands of years of tradition. In most faiths, there are tradition-minded practitioners that want to stay true to the old ways. There are still yogis wandering around India in complete renunciation of this worldly goods and affairs. The same with Buddhist monks across most of Asia. And there are Orthodox Jews and fundamentalist Christians and Muslims who believe that the truth resides infallibly in the scriptures as written by God. But apart from these conservatives, the more common worshiper of any faith tradition finds ways to make accommodation, to treat the spirit of their faith as more important than the word or the teaching. Most lists of the world's major religions include the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism from Asia. There are, of course, many others. Prothero's book contains a chapter on Yoruba religion from Africa and practices from there that migrated to the New World, especially in the Caribbean and Brazil. Houston Smith has a section on what he terms primal religion, focusing on Australia, but speaking about oral traditions and symbolic worship. My preference would have been to include a nature-based section, bringing pagan traditions, Native American worship, and panentheism to the fore. But an interesting choice by both Prothero and Smith is to include Confucianism as a major religion. There is no question that Confucian thinking is a major influence on East Asian culture. But even the Chinese don't list it as one of the 5 religions that they count in their nation. They tally up Buddhists, Taoists, Catholics, Protestants, and Muslims. But they don't talk about Confucianism religion. China is officially atheistic. During the Cultural Revolution, many Confucian texts were outlawed and burned, but they're gradually making a reappearance. The fact is that almost all Chinese practice Confucianism, and many are simultaneously partly Buddhist or Taoist as well. While some would term Confucianism a philosophy and not a religion, because it's mostly a guide to how to live appropriately and serve society and bring fulfillment to the individual, there is no God in Confucianism, although there is some vague understanding of a heaven with a will of some kind. But what Confucians do that feels religion is insist on infusing our world with sacred import. The way of heaven is immanent in human affairs. There is no sense of afterlife or a soul, and the familiar Confucian idea of devotion to one's ancestors is not an engagement with them, but a deeply respectful way of knowing their import in our lives. Largely, though, Confucian practice is a way of creating ethics, and any ritualistic actions are only intended to serve this end. Building character is the be-all and end-all of Confucian practice, and education and learning are essential. The important ideas are developing human-heartedness, or Ren, and familiarity with ritual etiquette and appropriate behavior, Li. The ways of building right relations are strict, and they're based on obligation and hierarchy. Respect and honor are at the core of interpersonal relations. Because it's not a belief system, Confucianism overlaps easy with the belief systems or other practices that do pervade East Asia. But it does not promote any beliefs of its own. Many Chinese consider themselves Confucian and Taoist, or Confucian and Buddhist, or all 3. But it's had a huge impact on the culture and the ways of life in Asia for over 2,000 years. And understanding Confucianism is understanding life, business, and all affairs in China and neighboring countries. Earlier, I read that piece from Houston Smith, claiming that all of the world's religions share much in common, that they provide multiple paths to a single goal. This is not a new idea, and it carries some truth in my mind. But I would say that the main way that the religions are similar is in promoting ethical standards. It's a common observation that the golden rule appears in almost all of these traditions, with a call to caring, compassion, And we know that religion has led to some of the least ethical behavior among humans as a cause and call to conquest and warfare. There are exceptions, but I think also that most of the harm done in the name of religion was probably done for other reasons as well. And religion just provided a readily manipulable symbol system to recruit warriors and to justify this action. But the fact that belief can be manipulated so easily is a cause for concern. But religions clearly differ in many ways. And I think I disagree with Houston Smith fundamentally. One of the things I like about Prothero's work is that he puts forth a very simple way of approaching these differences. And it is a simplification, but it's instructive. In Prothero's mind, each religion addresses a specific human problem that was important at the time it was initiated. And it offers a means to solve that problem and techniques for getting it done. Let me illustrate. Christianity. What the religion really talks about is how to deal with the imperfect person and our innate sinfulness. The solution is to find salvation. And depending on the Christian profession, this is done with some combination of pure faith or by good works. The Buddhists see the problem as human suffering of all types. And the solution is to step out of the things that cause us suffering and to attain nirvana. And we can do this by following the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes rightness of many types, meditative practices, etc. In Islam, the problem is people's bent towards self-sufficiency and their hubris of believing that they are independent from God. The solution is submission, which is what Islam means, bringing the soul to peace. And the techniques are to perform the profession of faith and practice the four pillars: ritual prayer, charity and almsgiving, fasting, and the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. In Hinduism, the problem is the eternal cycle of samsara. The solution is moksha, liberation from that cycle, and the technique to reach it is yogas, disciplines, and I guess patience. Jews, the problem is exile. The solution is to return both to God and to their true home. And the technique they offer is to keep the narrative alive and to obey the laws of their faith. In Confucianism, the problem is chaos. The solution is order. And the technique is through close practice of ethical and ritual rules. The Taoists see the problem as detachment from life. The solution is to live fully with awareness and to flourish. And the technique is to live in harmony with what is natural in the order of life. None of these fully describe what these religions do, but they really help us see how they do have, each has its own DNA that's very different from the other. They don't fully capture any of the religions, but they give a very clear picture of the fact that these major religious traditions are focused differently. There are other clear differences. On theological issues, religions can vary by questions as important as whether God matters or whether they're focused on this life or the next. We know that religious differences are not clearly understood or respected around the world. Much of the misunderstanding is just due to ignorance of the other. And we do need to understand, as our world becomes very rapidly a single place with the reality of shared information and events. And we owe it to those who worship and believe and think differently than we do to try to bring ourselves to a place where we can truly say, I see you. I'm not sure I understand you, but I have an idea of what you're about. As we learn, we might find much shared good in these faith traditions, and we might find things that we consider morally bereft. But more likely, we will expand ourselves and our own approach to the mystery that is life in this cosmos. And I apologize for going a little long, but I barely touched the topic. I shouldn't have picked such a big topic. Anyhow, I encourage people to join in this ongoing discussion. Now I invite you to rise if you're willing and able and sing.